Welcome to Book Huddle. I am so thrilled to have Julian on with us today. He wrote Pilar Ramirez and The Escape from Zafa, and then a sequel just barely came out, and I just finished it. Pilar Ramirez and the Curse of, oh my gosh, I just, San Zenon. Did I say it right?
You
Zenon?
knocked it out of the park.
All right, perfect. All right, so I just love Pilar. And I listened to the audiobook, and let me tell you that this narrator rocked it. Like, I listen to audiobooks all the time, but there are a few. There are just the select few audiobooks that it's like, I believe you. And Amanda, the narrator, yes, she was. Wasn't she just awesome?
Oh no, she was incredible. The minute that we got the audio samples, like the auditions and
Right.
whatnot, we got to Amanda's sample, and I was like, Pilar, is that you?
It's like, yes, yes,
Yeah, where you been?
right. That was excellent. So this is one of those books that is just even better listened to, I feel like.
Yeah.
The writing's just on point, and then the narration is like, I believe everything you're saying. Like, you are speaking these writers' words. So tell me about, where did you come up with this idea for Pilar? What's the backstory here?
Yeah, so thank you for that wonderful question and all those kind words. Yeah, Pilar is like very much a book of my heart. It's a book that I started writing in June of 2019, but realistically, our story starts a lot earlier than that. It's about 21 years ago. I was 8 years old, and I stumbled in on my mom, and she was crying. It's the first time that I'd ever seen her cry. Up until that moment, I didn't know that she could cry. And what's more, I never missed an opportunity to read to me like ever in my entire life is crying
Right,
over the book. So I'm like super double confused now, right?
right.
So 8-year-old me slides up to my mom and is like, yo, mom, what are you reading? And she says, this is the story of the women who fought back against the man who kicked your abuelo off the island. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she said, these are the Mirabal sisters. They're the four real life sisters who fought back against Trujillo. And I said, cool, 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 cool. But like, what do you mean kicked off? And so it turns out that in the 1950s, when my abuelo was a young man, he made a joke. And it was just a joke.
Oh my
And
gosh.
his friends. But the problem is the joke was about Trujillo.
Yeah.
And the problem is the joke gets back to the secret police, and they start coming around the neighborhood in those black VW Beetles that make a not subtle appearance in this sequel.
Yes.
They used to use those to snatch people up anytime, day or night, right? So they start coming around that neighborhood asking all these questions, and eventually becoming clearer and clearer by the hour that they're coming to snatch up my abuelo. So him and my abuela, having known one people, one language, basically one town their entire lives, have to finesse and get on this plane and go to America. That's basically the story of how my mother was born. This blows my tiny mind. And I did what I always did when I was mind blown. I went to the library. I asked
Yes.
the librarian, like, yo, do you have any books on this? I want to understand. They said they don't have any books for a kid in your reading level about that.
Right.
And I was like, well, what if I got really good at reading? They said it doesn't mean very much because the book really just doesn't exist. And it kind of stayed that way for 20 years. Like there weren't a whole lot of authors for Dominican kids. And
Right.
there certainly weren't that many authors who were trying to depict what it was for those of us who were like these kind of like third culture kids who are now like moving into this space after our parents are like one generation removed from Trujillo, right? And we
Right.
still see how anti-blackness is affecting like day-to-day life in DR. So, it's that famous Toni Morrison quote, like if there's a story you very desperately want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, because it's on you. Yeah, I got an opportunity to pitch a Caribbean American fantasy novel. And it's one of those things that you like, you want something sometimes so bad that you're like, well,
Yes.
if it had to exist, it was supposed to exist, it would exist now. There must be a good reason for why it doesn't exist. And there wasn't a good reason, so I did it anyway.
Yeah. That is so awesome. That is moving. So almost, I'm feeling like it's got some of you in Pilar then. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? Yeah.
I like to think that she's kind of like a alternate timeline, like little sister of mine. I
Right.
much funnier and braver than I am, but
Oh, she's
she,
awesome.
yeah, isn't she?
I
She
love her.
kind of just strolled into my head after I got the idea. They said, "Do you want to pitch a Caribbean American fantasy novel?" And I was like, "I mean, yeah, but like, what would it even?" Oh, wait, no, no, there she is.
There it is. There it is. That is so great. And these women are just strong, amazing women in this book, like all of them. So just thinking of this, all of these women, because some of them have different superpowers. And on this note, if you could have one of these powers, what would you want?
I think that it would be really cool to have the kind of Bruja powers that Pilar has access to. It's funny because Carmen, like the power of hers that I have, like not all the way, but she is like a kind of like manifestation of that. Is I was like,
Right.
oh, okay, see, Guapa's having like perfect memories. Like, what would like
Yes.
counter to like memory as power being? But also, it's like if you remember everything, then you remember everything.
Yes.
How do we map through that, and that becoming like such a huge bridge point for Pilar and Carmen like understanding each other? I like to think of it as what was the word I was using earlier? I learned most of the things I know about fiction from video games, so I like to think of
Yes.
that interview as kind of their loyalty mission.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
I feel like that's when they really start to understand each other.
Yeah, and that's I love that. So you have this history that you want to make people aware of, but then we've got the fantasy aspect, and then we've got so much about friendship and family. So I like that you talk about that because there's such a big key element being built up here of understanding and trust and loyalty to friend and family. And it was just done so beautifully. And I want to point out that this was your first book of fiction, but you're a poet, so you have writing experience, right? But this was just incredible to me to be reading this and be like, this is his first work. Like that's awesome.
Yeah, first novel.
That is so cool.
I was so thrilled to find that it wasn't just like a bundle of words.
No,
Like, oh, this
you
is
did
like
an
a
excellent
that was
job.
one of the great things about like listening to it on audiobook. I was like, ooh, what happened next?
Right? But like it's good when you can read or listen to your work and be like, I wrote that.
That was
That
pretty good. That
that
was
is
pretty
so cool. With the book. So it's a magic system, but tell me if I'm wrong. Like it's something that is dear to some people's heart what it's based on, right? Almost is it like a religion for some people? Some
yeah,
of these
so
that it's based on?
yeah, so the challenge in kind of like putting together like what does Zafa and Brujeria look like in conversation with Dominican Brujeria is that there are some elements that are like, you know, like you can find online, that you can find in
Right.
fairly public, and those were the ones that I like mostly was cribbing from alongside like things that I grew up with. Like I had Resguarda when I was a kid, right?
Right.
Um, but overall that like people's relationship with their brujeria, with their samba is a very deeply personal thing that I did not want to be like trafficking, and it's not necessarily something
Right.
that lends itself as naturally to a kind of like offensive magic, like fast-paced middle grade action system. And so for me a lot of it became about like, okay, well, what would I want the power to draw from alongside this, right? And so for
Okay.
me, Pilar's power coming from La Negra specifically, like this black sand that used to cover the entire island and remembers everything that had ever happened in like Dominican memory, right?
Right.
Be able to pull from memory because dictatorship tries to attack our memories before it attacks anything else, and also to be able to pull from something that is inextricable from her blackness, inextricable from the land, right? Was
Right.
about the power of diaspora, but also about making sure that, you know, like this is a Black Dominicana. I said it in the letter. I say it every
Yes.
time I'm introducing her because I was a Black Dominican kid. And there's so much that tries to tell us that Black Dominican people don't exist. And lots of Black Dominican people who try to tell us that they do not exist. But
Mm,
they do, and I do. And I wanted
right.
to have a heroine who was recognizably my mother's child.
That's awesome. Oh, I love it. And that must have been hard to keep that balance, but I think you did a really good job and kept the interest. Hello, this is my dog, my guest appearance here. I'm sorry. Meet Thea,
Oh,
everybody. Okay, thank you,
beautiful
Thea.
coach you have, little friend.
Thank you. Sit down. Sit down. All right. So was there a lot of research to make the second one happen, or were those similar stories?
Oh yeah, no, that's a great question. The original plan was that Pilar was a standalone.
Standalone.
I have kind of always gone at um actually, you mind if I tell you like a very, very brief anecdote?
Yeah, yeah.
Goes into my eventual recommendation at the end. Foundational series, right? Like one of my like big time forever and evers was the His Dark Materials series. Like the
Okay.
first poem like thing that I had ever memorized was that opening epigraph
Right.
from Paradise Lost of neither sea nor shore nor air nor fire, but all these in their pregnant causes mixed confusedly. That was like, oh, this is what language should do. This is how it should feel. It should be sermonic. It should be lyrical. It should be like, there should be a sense of great opening when you get
Yes.
there, right? And so it became like one of my all-time favorite book series. And then when I was in middle school, I did book reports on these, and I pitched these to everybody who would listen, right?
Uh-huh.
And then this girl who I was homies with came up to me and said, "Your books suck." And I was like, "Oh, well, why do you feel that way?" And we go back and forth for like half an hour. This
Uh-huh.
goes. And then finally, she's just like, "Look, I'm just saying, I never like jump around with a knife thinking that it's a portal to another world." And I was like, "Oh my God, you read book 2 first, you little fool." That's
You
why
cannot go out of order.
like that's why you don't know what's going on. That's like the worst book series possible to be like,
To
I'm
read
gonna
out of
stop
order.
right in the middle. And so for me, the big thing and the big challenge of writing the sequel was that I was like, I want each of these books to be one that while there's like a clear progression, there's like a 1 year gap between book 1 and book 2, that if you
Right.
pick up book 2, Pilar is still very recognizably Pilar, and
Yes.
she is saying things in a way that couches you into what had happened previously in case you pick this one
Yes.
up,
In the wrong order.
but also not in a way that it's like, ah, yes, Carmen, my dear old friend who I have not seen in 13 months and 5 days.
Awkward. Yes.
How was that mission that we went on 13 months and 4 days ago? Like, I
Right.
really wanted to make sure that I didn't get that feeling because that was the kind of thing that pulled me out of books as a kid and it bothered
Yes.
immensely, right? So that was one challenge of the sequel. Another challenge of the sequel was just that it was I needed to go to DR because when I was a kid, there was always just something getting in the way of us getting there, right?
Right.
And so the first time that I ever remember getting really excited for a trip is when I was about Pilar's age. I was really excited and something came up and we couldn't afford to go and it was da da da. So this is in a lot of ways kind of my favorite of the books that I've gotten to write because it very tangibly like moved me into a lifetime dream. I got to hide out in my abuela's apartment for like a month and a half of like pre-vaccine COVID research, but it's good to hear and I got to hear and smell and walk around and hear all these stories about what my abuelo was like around the neighborhood before he passed.
Yes.
Like so there was all of this experiential research that went in alongside reading a bunch of these books that are behind me about just like what Trujillo had been up to and trying to decide which of these things I could put in a book that is also meant for children.
Right. Right.
This is a real life supervillain.
Right. It's definitely so exciting. I've been recommending it because I even need to get more people to hear about this book. And um, so I want to talk about the cover.
Yeah.
So are you involved when you create these covers for Pilar? Did you get to talk to the artist and say, or did they show you some art and you said, I'm not feeling that? Or was it a complete surprise?
This is a wonderful question. I'm very picky when it comes to
Right.
covers. So I try to be really collaborative from the
Yes.
outset, so it doesn't just come across as like me being like a diva. So I wrote like after we turned in the first draft of Pilar, and I was like, I feel like I all of the parts of this story are going to be in the same place this time next week.
Yes.
Like I feel like I finally got it. I was like, okay, I think I don't know really what I didn't really know what to do because it was the first couple of days of the pandemic as
Oh,
well.
right.
Like literally like 2 weeks into the pandemic, lost my job, turned in this book.
Oh my gosh.
Whole new world started right then and there.
Right.
1 year ago, nearly 1 year ago today, exactly, actually.
Wow.
Uh, which is super, super weird, super, super wild, but whatever. Um, I'm sorry, I literally it just keyed in on that, which is so
Right.
in the middle of like
Anniversary.
I'm in the middle of like 4 other deadlines right now. So I'm
Oh
just like,
man.
oh, wow, that's super wild. Like so much life has happened since then.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
but yes, so I turned in the book and I was like, okay, well, I actually it was like it's like having like a friend who you go see for coffee
Yeah. Yeah.
every day, sometimes multiple times per day. And then one day they just like went to Guam. Like that is what it's like to have like a series protagonist, especially for the first time. So I was like, okay, well, I have
Right.
to do something to like like fill this gap in my day.
Yes.
A letter about what I thought the cover should look like. And that
Nice.
for me, there were like three things that were most important. Number one, which was the thing that I was saying a little bit earlier about like, hey, I wrote this book. I know what my characters look like. Let me be
Yes.
very clear. I wrote a book full of dark-skinned Dominican characters.
This is who my character will be.
It's really, really important to me that we don't end up with a Hunger Games movie volume one situation where like everybody read the book and everybody was cool, and then Amanda Stenberg showed up and everybody's like, whoa, what the heck?
What?
So I wrote that I was like, I want to be unambiguous about this. This is what these characters look like. I feel like there should be like the book's central intimacy is really about the two of them, right? It's
Yes.
the
Right.
connection across these two islands, across like Chicago to this island that she's never been
Yes.
to before. So I was like, Carmen should be there. There should be a sense of danger. And then we talked a lot about what the sense of motion would look like. We brought in an artist. She was awesome. She was amazing. It wasn't quite the vibe that we were looking for. It was a little bit younger.
Okay.
Just in terms of like what it was doing, but I mean her work was also incredible. And so then they sent me another. Sorry, this turned into a really long answer to your
That's
question.
right. That's right.
But yeah, so then they send you a portfolio full of like a bunch of different people's work. And Mayara Sampeo, who did both of these covers,
Yes.
I remember falling absolutely in love with her work. But one of the most important things, I'm going to rotate just a little tiny bit, see if we can get it in the shot. I don't know how much it's showing up, but that is my favorite picture of Miles Morales.
Okay.
Portrait done by Chuck Stiles. And so she has also done it. And so I literally just hung it that day. Like literally
Nice.
just hung it that day. And the first picture in her portfolio was Miles Morales going like this.
Nice. You're like,
It
oh,
was a perfect
there
picture
it
of him.
is.
Like, oh, well, there we go. Like she was far and away one of my favorites. I mean, she was just such a delight to work with on both of these covers.
Nice.
They send you like sketches and then they fill them in with color, and she just absolutely got the vibe, the tone of the book.
Nice.
And it's so great. It's so great. Just like see little kids like have a book that they like see themselves like swinging into action on the cover.
Yes.
Uh,
I just felt it when I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I mean, don't exclude a book by its cover, but definitely pick it up because of its cover. Like, yeah. And this is one of them. So yeah, definitely really well-rounded that we've got the cover, we've got the narration, and the writing is just excellent there. I feel like it's on point, and it's words that, a teenager would say. This young, was she about 12? Is she 12?
She's 12, yeah.
Okay, right. That's what I'm saying. She's 12 and she talks like a 12-year-old would talk. Like, yes, I believe you. And so what I'd love to find out next, you said you have some deadlines coming up. Do you have more fiction that you're writing? Are you writing more middle grade, or are you going back to poetry? What do you have in the works?
Oh yeah, we got a lot of the works. The R&D department of my brain is just
Nice.
working overtime right now. But yeah, no. So we have for young people next year in the fall, I literally have an editorial meeting about that in a couple of hours.
Nice.
It is my first standalone novel outside of the Pilar duet. It is called The Chain Breakers, and it follows 12-year-old Violet Moon, who is a Grim Reaper who has inherited the command of her father's ship in a world inspired by the Middle Passage, where they help the souls of folks lost in the Middle Passage.
Ooh, wow. Ooh,
Yeah.
I love it. Just that short little description has me so intrigued. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's been it's been a wonderful book to write. It's been a very healing book to write. It's been a very challenging book to write.
Yeah, all the
It's
feels.
very much become my like long love letter to like. Have you read The People Could Fly? You read The
No,
People
I
Could Fly?
haven't.
No. Okay. You've heard of it though, right?
You know what? I haven't.
People Could Fly is like one of like Virginia Hamilton's like
Okay, okay.
like absolutely one of her masterworks.
Well, I will go look it up then. So you feel
Yeah,
some connection from The People Can Fly to this one?
this book has like very much become my like my love letter to it. Like you can't see it because like but right above my desk, which means it is right above your right
Oh,
shoulder.
Okay.
Is it's a note from myself that says, "Never forget, they can fly. Flight is only ever a few words away."
Awesome.
Because the story of the people could fly, very briefly, is essentially like it's a story that's narrated and it begins on a plantation. It begins
Right.
looking over this group of folks, this group of black folks who are in the fields, like, being enslaved,
Right.
uh toiling with the cotton. And at one point, this the baby starts crying. um and so they try to quiet the baby, but they can't quiet the baby. And so the overseer is like, "Yeah, quiet that baby." And of course, the baby, being a baby, is
It's
like, "Nah."
baby.
Of course, like the
Right.
overseer, being like a heartless witch, like whips the babe, which of course does not help the situation at all.
Oh, makes you
It
sick.
makes everything horrible. And
Yeah.
at that point, this old man who is in the fields remembers the words of power, that like, and he remembers the words and he says them, and he flies and he begins to float into the air. And so he starts to whisper them to other people, and some stayed behind at the plantations, but some of the people who could still remember the words and pass them to others flew away.
Oh,
And it was the first story
beautiful.
I ever heard about slavery,
Yeah.
was this story of, like, in the face of bondage, remembering that your power is still within you and it comes from somewhere else. And how much of a like talisman that was to me throughout all of my like early education about slavery, which was intensely traumatic and very poorly handled. For like every available instance. And so for me, when like minute to the second that I'm just gonna show the cover again because I'm so proud of it.
Yes.
The minute
Yes.
to the second that the first draft of Pilar 2 had been drafted and written and done, I had a vision of a black girl at the prow of a great ship, and
Hmm.
it turned out to be Violet. And I was wondering, like, where is she sailing to? Where is she going? And I thought, well, what if the ship is beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean? What if there was more? What if, in the same way that I benefited a lot from thinking, like, what if there was more than one Siguapa? I was like, what if there was more than one Grim Reaper? What if they had 5 different societies that had formed down there, and each of them had like different like views? Because also, like, black people's politics were like very monolithic when I was a kid, or in terms of their depiction in children's books. And I remember very
Right.
distinctly in trouble for asking why there was no Malcolm X Day, despite the fact that he lived a very broad and very like wildly various political life. And I thought that that was like a thing that kids deserve to see. Is there's one society that's like, yo, we should go to war with these
Yeah.
weapons, let's go sharks. And there's another society that's like, dog, we gotta stay right here and expand. There's another one's like, yo, like, what if we just kind of did most of these different things?
All right. All right.
So the variety of the approach, I think, is also part of using history as a space of magic. To your question, but yeah, that's the thing that I'm working on next, for young readers.
I love it. I love because what I've actually read are things like a most recent one like Never Caught. Um
Yeah.
the George and Martha Washington's slave, the story of her. But I love, mostly it was just like historical fiction. A little bit of like maybe Ophi's Ghosts, where there's some historical fiction mixed in with a ghost story. But I'm loving this, that we're getting some history with like this magical fantasy. I'm excited about this. I think that's such a great way to do it, because there's not a very large population of children that are going to want to be reading. I mean, they'll read it maybe for a class assignment, but they're not going to want to read straight up historical fiction. So this is going to make this so much more readily available to expose them to these big moments in history.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and you're bringing it, like, just when you were saying it, I feel like that's probably the poet in you, that like the language. I'm just getting all the feels. I got goosebumps when you were telling me about that, because
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, I feel like just that power in the language of that, you're really expressing that through, what am I trying to say, through the art of the language.
Thank you, yo. Yeah, for me, that's very much like just a function of. I was telling a group of kids at a school visit this the
Right.
other day because they asked me why I write like that. And I was like, for me, it was about the fact that, like, when I was a kid, I had this whole vast interiority that I was just trying
Yes.
to find the words for. And I feel like if you are somebody who can look at the work that I do and say like 12-year-olds don't talk like that or they don't think like that, they don't have
Right.
thoughts that are that complex, then it's because the 12-year-olds in your life don't trust you.
There you
Because
go.
if I get into the mind of a 12-year-old for even a second, it is a vast and lush city. And I
Yes.
want to try and make vast and lush cities for them to be inside of, even during the hard times.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. I'm hoping that this just, takes the literary world by storm. It's awesome.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
so let's hear, I love to hear from all my guests a book that you would love to recommend to children, any age. What is one of your favorite books that you like to share?
Okay,
I mean,
so
besides your own, Brilliant.
oh, of course, yes, of course, of course, of course. Like very, very recent releases, I really loved Aniana Del Mar Jumps In,
Okay.
by Jasmine Mendez. Amazing, amazing.
Okay.
It's a verse novel. It follows Aniana, who is a childhood swimmer. She has juvenile arthritis, and so the thing is, water therapy is very good for that. But also, her mother has some trauma that she is working through in terms of a drowning that had happened in the family. So the
Wow.
tension between those things that is moving through this verse novel, I think that the characterization is spectacular. The setting is wonderful. Everything's super evocative. And alongside that, it is a space where if you have a kid in your life who loves narrative and loves language but doesn't love reading, sometimes I think that it can help to do a verse novel because we can finally break some of the some of the ironclad rules of grammar,
Yes.
like a little bit of like the filler sentences fall away. There's just a way that I was a huge reader as a kid, but I wasn't a huge writer, and I wasn't
Yes.
necessarily in love with what I was able to write until poetry allowed me to have a relationship with writing that was just language to language, right? So
Right.
Anya Umar jumps in terms of things that have just released, in terms of like historical things, or
Nice.
kind of like little bit more cash is Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down is just one of my like nearest and dearest, like read it cover to cover. If you are a fan of graphic novels, Frizzy by Claribel Ortega is one of the best.
Oh, excellent. I'm just getting into graphic novels. I've acquired a newfound appreciation. I feel like
It's a
different from
really
when I
good
was a kid, that we are
novels.
really making things so much more accessible. Like starting with well, this is actually the graphic novel version. I meant to grab the crossover.
Ah, yeah,
Um with
classic.
starting with that verse that you were saying, that verse is really something that you wouldn't even think would be something these kids would consume. But I think part of it's that it's shorter, and part of it that you're right, that kids do want to consume things in a poetry kind of form of a way. So the graphic novels and the verse were really making things so much more readily available to kids that they can consume the way they want it.
Yeah, I think it's like also like kids like they're not as formulaic as we
Yeah.
learned with
Yes.
language across the course of
Yes.
like writing. Like the thing is, like, I remember very distinctly like feeling like I was growing up because I was able to tell what was about to happen in a TV
Yes.
show
Right.
because I just had kind of like banked down. I was like, okay, well, they're not gonna kill Tommy Pickles, so like, what's really gonna happen? It's like he's probably just gonna fall off the jungle
Meat
gym.
pickles.
There's just like a
That's
certain
awesome.
level of stakes that's removed from that, but that's a thing that comes with experience. But when you're a kid,
Yes.
stories can be any number of shapes. You never had to
Yes.
necessarily analyze them and then be told this is the story, the shape that a
Right.
story should take. Like beginning, middle, and end, sure. But like in terms of like what could happen in the beginning, what could happen in the
Right.
middle, what could happen at the end, it doesn't really matter as much to them. There's not like cakes and cakes of logic that are based on
Yes.
top of that. And so I think that as a result, the flexibility that you get with language at a verse level ends up being like
Yes.
supremely helpful for a young reader who maybe is not necessarily like interested in going margin to margin. Also, just as somebody who has a lot of homies who
Mhm.
poetry helped them a lot with their like ADHD, which went undiagnosed well into their late 20s.
Right. Right.
It's also especially helpful, not to say that verse doesn't require our attention, but that it calls our attention in a different way.
Yes. Yes.
So
And so
yeah,
much
if you're
more.
a visual learner, like it can be really helpful. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
you're great. You're great. So much more that kids get out of it that they don't think. Like a lot of adults hesitate to have a child read a graphic novel because they just think that they're not getting things out of it. But there is so much power in verse and graphic
And
novel. Like, for instance, the infancy. the story's not all there, that they've got to read between the lines and find those or whatever it may be. So yeah,
with that. Plus, sorry,
that would be in verse as well. Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
want
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
a
One
good
more.
thing about Frizzy by Claribel Ortega, Claribel A. Ortega.
Okay.
Frizzy is a fantastic, grounded, real, like fantastic, grounded, very real world story. Which, yeah, I've done two or three, which are realistic. Because Long Way Down, like at a conceptual level, has like a little bit of like realism, but it's mostly grounded in our world. Frizzy is entirely grounded in our world. It follows this mother-daughter relationship, and as they're moving through a relationship with going to the peluquera, the ¿cómo se dice? The salon. They
Yes.
go to the salon together, and she hates going to the salon, but she's going because in her mind's eye, that's how they have their connection. It is a gorgeous book. It's something that I read in all 125 pages in one sitting. Uh, Everything that I would want to, as somebody who had hair like this and had a lot of people around me who did not treat it with kindness or respect. Uh, this book is everything that I would give to the daughter I do not yet have. So I
Awesome.
cannot say enough good things about Frizzy. I cannot say enough good things about Aniana Del Mar. I cannot say enough good things about Long Way Down, and also Amber McBride, Future Land by H.D. Hunter. Incredible, incredible book that just came out. Yeah, I mean, it's a really wonderful time to be a kid lit creator. I'm really just grateful to be a book in the house.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much. That gives me some great ones to add because actually I hadn't heard of those. And you
It's
know what?
all for,
His
like,
Dark
children's
Materials is
stories.
on my list, and actually I haven't read that before.
Oh yeah,
Surprisingly. I mean, who hasn't heard of
very,
it? But
very,
I haven't gotten
very
to it.
jealous.
Yeah.
Very jealous that you get to experience those books for the first time. For me,
Isn't
I
it? Yeah. There are some
think
things that you wish you could unread and experience it again, right?
we're in the early hundreds at this point for me in terms of like revisitations, and
Right. Right.
it's one of the reasons why I've been like, okay, as soon as all these deadlines are over, I'm gonna finally get to binge the series. I fell behind by a whole lot,
Yeah.
but is one of the most faithful adaptations of a book series I've ever
Oh,
seen.
beautiful.
To me, because I got cheated out of my other childhood obsession series, which was Artemis Fowl. I was a huge Artemis Fowl kid, and I feel like
That was like, I can appreciate what you're doing with this, but not that it was based on this book. Like there was too much.
okay, so yeah, the thing is, the movie, I knew we were not getting the Artemis Fowl movie that I asked for
Right.
trailer, but then I was like, okay, well, I have to give it a try anyway. I want to see what all is
Right.
going on. I made it all the way through the whole thing.
At
But
least
I
you
knew
didn't walk
we were
away.
in trouble the minute we were at the title card ended and we saw Artemis surfing. And I was like, this famously unathletic child who is never not seen in an Armani suit is surfing before a
Right.
therapy
You're like,
session.
sure, sure.
No. This should have been a TV series. I knew it.
Right. And I appreciate, yeah, I love that people are starting to do that. So they,
Anyway, I'm so sorry.
no, I'm sorry. Like, my 60-pound dog off my lap. She's here because she's injured, and here she is climbing on my lap. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
So
you're all good.
with
I too
this
would
dog
want to be
rear in
outside
the
if I were
screen,
her.
let's end here. Thank you so much,
Sounds like a
Julian.
plan. All right, you have a great
All
day.
right.